What's up everyone, I'm Earl the Rookie Woodworker, and for today's video I'm going to work on this box right here. This is a box of cutoffs that I've sat here and added to over the last couple years. It's my cutoffs with potential box. So I'm going to see what I can get out of this box. I'm thinking I'm going to try to make a chaotic cutting board. So yeah, let's get to it. Usually if I make an end grain cutting board and I'm shooting for a specific dimension for that cutting board, I'll make the initial board a little bit longer so that I can get one extra piece out of it. That way if there's a surprise knot in the wood or a surprise crack in the wood somewhere and I need to replace one of those, I have an extra piece to replace it. And if I don't need to replace it, then I just end up throwing the extra in this box. Alright, so I think I'm going to sort out these by length and make multiple boards that hopefully whenever I chop them up the next time, they'll be pretty close to the same length. And then we'll glue them together and then we'll start going into our chaotic fashion. And what you see here is me messing up pretty much right away. What I should have done here is made sure all of these boards were the same height. See, what you see here is boards that are ranging from a little over 2 inches to 1.5 inches of height. So whenever these glue up, they end up being different thicknesses. And that's going to cause a little bit of problems down the road. So what you see here at this point is we have 4 boards glued up. So what we're going to do is get these boards out of the clamps, we'll chop them all up, and then we'll come down to our first consolidation. So for the first cuts I want to do here, I'm going to use my miter gauge to run these across the table saw and just trim off the edges a little bit. Make some nice straight edges. That way whenever we go to cut these down, chop them up into little pieces, we get nice straight pieces out of this. Alright, so after slicing and dicing all of those boards, this is what we have. We have a bunch of pieces that'll glue up into a super long board. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to glue it up into one super long board. I'm going to glue it up into 2 regular size boards. And then after we slice and dice them a couple more times, then they'll come together into one board that's more reasonably sized. But yeah, we're on to the second glue up. With every glue up, you kind of want to reorganize these things so that they don't fit together in the form that they was in before. So yeah, just reorganize them to make them look a little more chaotic every time you go through a glue up. And now we are down to 2 boards instead of 4. At this point I've come to the realization of how much of a mistake it was to not run those pieces through the table saw and make sure they were all the same thickness before I glued up the first glue up. And now I'm trying to use the drum sander to try to fix that a little bit, as much as I could anyway. Now I'm going to take these two boards over to the miter saw, and I'm going to go to the ends. I set my miter saw at about a 6-degree angle, and then I'm going to chop the ends off at that 6-degree angle. And this will give each board its starting point for being chopped the rest of the way up. Which will be finished over here on the table saw. If you're doing this, have a riving knife on your table saw. I don't know why I don't have one on it right now. I guess I'm dumb, and I'm about to find out the survival of the fittest thing if I keep doing this. Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do, because it'd be really easy for one of these to get kicked back at me right there at this point. The table saw cuts pretty good, and I probably could glue it up straight off the table saw, but I want perfection in my glue ups, especially with these chaotic boards. A lot of times it's really hard to not end up with gaps in your board. So I'm going to use the drum sander and try to make sure everything is perfect on both sides of each piece. But yeah, perfectly flat sides make really happy glue ups that are nice and tight, and you don't end up with a bunch of gaps in your board and stuff like that look kind of atrocious and take away from all of the hard work that you put into that board. So yeah, take that extra time and do that extra step if you can. And when you glue this up, make sure you take some extra time and look over every piece that you're putting together. And make sure you're not gluing something that you just chopped apart right back together, because it's really easy to do whenever you're doing these. Then for your next round of chopping it up, you want to make sure your angles is going in the opposite direction. That way your cuts are crisscrossing each other for this one. So one good thing about doing YouTube videos is whenever you go back to start editing a video and you look through the footage that you took during your work, you really see where you're risking your safety whenever you're doing these things, and it gives you an opportunity to work on that in the shop. Because doing this 2 sets of cuts in a row, it's pretty clear I was pretty oblivious to it there. So yeah, you woodwork and you learn, right? But yeah, same process, running it through the drum sander. If you don't have a drum sander, you could probably do this in a planer or a jointer. I don't know that I like running it through the planer, because I feel like these pieces could come apart in the planer and just reap havoc. Maybe the same thing in a jointer too. So this is where I really like the drum sander. And again, it's time to sort them and stick them. Sort it out, make sure everything looks plenty chaotic and nothing's like matching up together. You don't want to end up book matching pieces that you just cut. It's really easy to do. I caught myself several times throughout this process doing that, so yeah, keep an eye out for that. Glue bottles over there getting overly excited about this glue up. lop off this jagged edge. In hindsight, I probably should have done this on a bandsaw. These little tiny pieces like this, sometimes whenever you do that on a miter saw, it'll kick those pieces and they'll rattle around your miter saw box there a little bit. But yeah, probably should have done this on a bandsaw. You should at least have your safety squints extra tight on that one. That boy. Now we're catching on. Look at us go. Getting all safe and stuff. But seriously, that's all the harder it is to put them on. It's easy to work safe with these saws. And no excuse not to. Sand in the places you've been. Da, 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 da. I think I finally reached the point where I can consolidate the two boards into one board. So let's get to it. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I need to make a border for this board. And I don't really have scraps that can make a complete border. So I'm going to have to make this out of actual good wood. So I'm going to go with some walnut, and we'll make a walnut border that goes around this board. In another moment of not thinking, you're not supposed to have your hands within 8 inches of the blade when using this saw. These pieces were 7 inches long, so I should have been using maybe a crosscut sled, or at the very least I should have been using a push stick while cutting these pieces. So do as I say and not as I do. But now we can glue them and stick them together and make another board out of these. So before we go putting the border on, it's time to trim up the edges and make them pretty and get the dimension right to where we want it to be. And because I didn't wipe off the glue before I let it sit, I get to scrape it off. Yay! Again, we'll use the drum sander to make sure this is nice and flat. You can use your planer to do this, but being that these pieces are going sideways, your planer is going to get clogged with the sawdust that this creates. And now it's time to chop it up into 4 pieces. So the border is going to be a 2-part glue up. I glue on the sides first, and then what I'll do is I'll trim right down the ends a little bit, because I'm going to make these side pieces a little bit longer than the board itself. So then we'll trim right down that side, make it nice and flat and perfect, and then we'll come back and then we'll glue on the end pieces next. Now we're starting to see this thing come together. But you see those deep pockets, that's part of the problem with not making sure these pieces were the same height before I started gluing all this stuff together. And that took some work on the drum sander. And now it's time for the oil bath. I tell you what, I got this tub. It's basically a tote, a big flat tote, and you put about 2 gallons of mineral oil in there, and then you just dip your boards in there. It's made the oiling process a little bit faster. Not that it was slow to begin with, but this makes it a little bit faster. Then I built this thing that sits on top of it that drains all the oil off of it back into the tub, and I let it sit there for a couple hours, and then I just put the lid back on the tub, and it's ready to go for the next time I make a couple boards. But yeah, that's a picture of it right there, sitting there with a bunch of boards in it, and that's our board right there in the back where we can't hardly see it. Now after the mineral oil bath, I'll let it sit for a day or two, and then I come back over it with a mixture of beeswax and mineral oil. You can buy this almost anywhere, but I make this myself because it's just a lot cheaper and easier just to make it yourself. I wouldn't say easier, but it's a lot cheaper to make it yourself. If you're interested in learning the process of how to make it, I mean, it's a pretty simple process, but I can make a video on that if there's some interest. Just let me know in the comments below, and yeah, I might explore that option later on. But yeah, I just take a paper towel and I rub this on pretty much all over it. I rub it on pretty thick, and basically what this stuff does is the beeswax will sit there and set into the deeper grain, and you see how it has that nice sheen after a while of sitting there. I let it sit for about an hour and it looks like this, and then I come back with a dry paper towel and I buff it in. I'm not trying to wipe it off, I'm just trying to buff that stuff in really well. And it ends up looking pretty great, and it feels pretty smooth. It really feels good to the touch after this process. But just like that, that is it for this build. We got a lot of scrap wood that we've got taken care of and consolidated and put into this one beautiful cutting board. Turned out great. I'm excited about it. If you like this video, do me a favor and hit that like button. If you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe as well. My channel has a lot of cutting board content, so feel free to go over there to the channel and check out more cutting board videos over there. And I've got a couple more cutting board ideas that will be coming down the pipe over the next couple months too. So yeah, we'll see you in the next video, and until next time, make something awesome.